Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It looks like most people have had the opportunity to join us now. I'm very excited that you all have chosen to join us for our first Lunch and Learn session focused on child abuse prevention. And next, I am going to go ahead and introduce our presenters. We have our President and CEO, Natalie Leek, with us today, as well as Ashley Stock, our Director of Programming and Clinical Operations. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Natalie.
Thank you everyone for joining us. We're excited to be hosting our Lunch and Learn for April Child Abuse Prevention Month. We'll talk a little bit more about Prevention Month activities, but today our goal is to walk you through a Lunch and Learn, not only to learn about Providence House and how our services intersect with child abuse prevention, but also to have Ashley join us to help educate all of you about what does child abuse and neglect mean, what is it, how you can identify and report it. So the first thing I want to do is, for those of you who may be relatively new to Providence House, is talk about who we are. Providence House is one of the nation's largest and longest operating crisis nurseries in the United States and Canada. We have a 30-bed campus on our west side, and for those of you who've been watching us as we grow and evolve, we're planning a new campus on the east side in the Buckeye community. So stay tuned for news on that. This is our 40th anniversary. So we were founded in 1981, and we've served almost 10,000 children in those 40 years at Providence House. So we know these children and families well. We understand the circumstances they're confronting, and child abuse prevention is one of the core tenets of our mission. We are licensed, accredited, evaluated, nationally recognized, and awarded. You can see a number of organizations that license and accredit us. We are a partner with United Way and Community Shares, and we do rank in the top tier for Charity Navigator and GuideStar as an excellent steward and nonprofit leader in managing the gifts of our donors and utilizing the optimal amount of funding for program delivery like child abuse prevention. As I mentioned, the key tenet of our mission is to protect children who are at risk of abuse and neglect. We also really focus on supporting families through crisis. So these are families coming to us where risk for their children is high, but we can help them resolve that through the intervention that Ashley and her team provide. And ultimately, to strengthen our communities through education and outreach so that we can prevent child abuse and neglect as a community. The vision for Providence House is ultimately that children everywhere are in safe, loving homes free from abuse and neglect. And in a recent strategic planning survey that we sent out and had hundreds of responses to, this messaging is really resonating with the community, both vision and mission. We want to keep our children safe as a community, and we're hoping that the information we share with you today can help you be a part of that work with us, even more than just supporting Providence House. I want to just quickly talk about the values and philosophy of our organization. We really are a multi-generational program. I think a lot of people think about Providence House and babies and children, which certainly is a big part of our work every single day on campus. But we really are working with parents, co-parents, grandparents are a growing population. So this is the whole family across the age span, and these services integrate together ultimately to help the family move through crisis and keep children safe long term. We use a strength-based approach for our families. So families are coming with real challenges, but they also have real strengths, things that they're bringing to their parenting, to their goals for the future. And we really want to focus on those strengths and build on them. And with our social work teams and our childcare teams, help them feel really good about the work that they're doing and the strengths they already have. We are a data culture. So those of you who know Providence House and get our materials know we track everything, and we want to share real outcomes about the quality work that we do so that you know the impact that we're really having. We're not just telling stories. We're not just, we are assessing our own outcomes to constantly improve the work and the organization. And we really recognize the value of the niche service we provide. We can't be everything to everyone. Unfortunately, particularly in Greater Cleveland, we're surrounded by amazing partners who do specific work in areas like mental health and addiction, homelessness and housing, job employment and job training. And we leverage those partners to strengthen our families. Our focus is protecting children and strengthening families through parent support and education, and creating the system network of partners so that they have a solid foundation long term. And most importantly, our value in philosophy is an acknowledgement and a deep respect for the difficult situations that families are confronting. I always say, as a parent myself, I think about the place I would need to be emotionally, financially, to come to strangers with my most precious treasures, my children. And that's the approach we take, is that deep respect and understanding for where they're at and how difficult this choice is. But they know ultimately it's about keeping their children safe and keeping their families together. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashley now for a little bit of the I missed a slide here. What crisis, so again, just reiterating what crisis nurseries do and can do to keep children and families safe. Number one, preventing child abuse and neglect by protecting children in our crisis nursery. So giving families a choice, a place that they can bring their children and know that they will be safe so that they can focus on the other issues that are creating crisis in the family. We're also allowing parents to really address those crises without worrying about losing custody of their children. This is a major factor for many families, and why they often don't seek help is they're afraid if they step forward and really address these crises or let people know what they're confronting, they may lose custody of their children, and we do not take custody. We're really working on educating, nurturing parents, again, focusing on strengths and building from there, and creating safe, stable caregivers that are resilient in future crises or in future moments of challenge. And so we're really building on their network, their social network, their human services network, so that they can continue to maintain children at home with them with self-sufficiency. And we're really working with families who have long histories, unfortunately, multi-generations frequently, of abuse, neglect, system involvement. And we're working with parents who have come to a realization that I want this to end. I want this to end for me. I want this to end for my children. And they're really putting in the hard work to help break those cycles that their family sometimes has been confronting in a third or fourth generation family coming to us for help. So this is the focus of the work that we do. And Ashley's going to jump in now and give you some background specifically on what is child abuse and neglect. So I'll turn it over to Ashley.
Thanks so much, Natalie. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Again, my name is Ashley Stock. I'm the Director of Programming and Clinical Operations with Providence House. I've been with the company for over 13 years, and it is truly my joy to join in with families doing this hard work of resolving crises to keep kids safe and families together. So before I dive into the content, I just wanted to remind you that if you have any questions during the time that we're talking, you can go ahead and use the question and answer box below. If you hover your mouse towards the bottom of the screen, you can type in the Q&A section. And also just wanted to remind you that the topics that we're talking about today, because it's child abuse and neglect, this could be difficult for you to hear. Please take care of yourself. We know that this is your lunchtime. Do what you need. Take care of yourself first. If you need to turn off the lunch and learn, we understand. If you need to step away and come back, we get it. This is hard work, and it's day in, day out for us, but we know that might not be your reality. So we are going to talk about the educational topics of abuse and neglect, go over some descriptions, talk about some behaviors and signs. We just wanted to warn you about the content. It is heavy. So again, please do take care of yourself. Okay. So the first thing we're going to talk about is child abuse. The definition is this is an act against a child. It's something that you do that causes them harm, and it is not by accident. There are 3 types of abuse that are defined by the Ohio Revised Code. So we're going to go through each one of these. The first is emotional abuse. So this is engaging in a pattern of behavior that causes mental injury, or impairs the self-esteem or self-worth of a child. There are some ways that you can notice this behavior, some signs to look out for in children who may have experienced emotional abuse. So anything from being belittled, berated, ignored, or threatened. If they've been rejected or love has been withheld from them, you might see a lot of signs regarding eating. So you could see some disordered eating patterns like hoarding, binging, or purging or restricting the food they consume. You can see some communication issues around stuttering, some verbal and physical tics. You might notice some delayed speech based on the child's age. And there's also some social aspects that you can look at when we talk about emotional abuse to see if somebody may have been experiencing this. So difficulty maintaining relationships with others, self-isolating, some cruel or violent behavior towards animals, and any impaired self-esteem and self-confidence. Okay. The next one is physical abuse. So this is any physical injury caused to a child, including death, that did not occur by accident. So you might be most familiar with this. Unfortunately, this kind of ends up in the news most often. So we talk about hitting, punching, slapping, biting a child, causing burns, but also included in physical abuse is just the threat to harm them or to create a risk to that child. So some signs to look for if you think somebody may have experienced physical abuse would be injuries that are unexplained. So this could be like bruising in areas that aren't common for a normal, like trip and fall or bumping into something. So looking for bruising around the throat, lower back, or wrists, for example. Any kind of unusual markings, so bites, burns, use of instruments, and then also repeated broken bones can be a sign of physical abuse. So some of those social indicators that you want to look at that could tell you, even if you don't see any of those physical signs, that a child may be experiencing physical abuse would be fear of a person who provides them with care. So their caregiver, unusual shyness, a reluctance to return home, also wearing clothes during seasons that are inappropriate for the weather. So wearing a lot of long sleeves, long pants during the winter, potentially to cover up any injuries, and also just depressed mood could be a sign that physical abuse is occurring. And the third type is sexual abuse. So this is a wide range of sexual activity against a minor child. This could include, but does not require penetration, nor is any contact with a minor child required. So this could be things like fondling, masturbation in front of a child, intercourse, and sex trafficking, but it also can be things like making obscene phone calls to a youth, sending text messages that are pornographic in nature, any kind of digital or like electronic communication involving nudity, and also owning and distributing pornographic content involving a minor. So when we talk about sexual abuse, some of the things you want to watch for that are the physical indicators would be sexually transmitted diseases, discharge or bleeding, bruising in the genital area, pregnancy, but more so you'll want to look at the behavioral indicators. So you could see some sexual promiscuity among children who've been abused, substance use, self-harming behavior, so cutting, burning, scratching, and this may not be with the intent of dying by suicide. It might just be non-suicidal self-injury. You could see some changes in school performance, a decline in relationships with peers and others, and also some issues around sleep. So having nightmares, being afraid to be alone, being afraid of the dark, especially if those were things that weren't present prior to the abuse occurring. So then we want to talk about neglect. So whereas abuse is something that's done to a child, neglect is an act of omission. So it's failure to act on behalf of that child. So this could include inadequate or dangerous child rearing practices, and you may not be able to see that this is happening. With abuse, it's a little bit easier to notice the signs. With neglect, you may not be able to see anything. So with neglect, we kind of look at it in a couple different ways. There could be issues around basic care or dependency issues where a parent or guardian isn't able to feed a child correctly, bathe them. They're not able to provide suitable living conditions. And these issues could be related to things that that parent or caregiver is experiencing, like poverty or addiction and mental health. So it's not that they're not trying, it's just there's these complex factors that get in the way of providing the right kind of care for a child. Certainly those things can also be done intentionally, withholding food or not providing proper hygiene to a child as well. So just wanted to make sure I said that. Neglect can also be surrounding the supervision of a child, so not providing them with the correct supervision and support, leaving children home alone, leaving children to care for their younger siblings. And then also medical and educational neglect are important to notice. So if a child is behind on their immunizations, if they're truant or not attending school. So again, some of the signs you might want to look for that you can see with neglect would be, poor hygiene, lice, untreated illness or injury, a child being underweight for their age, not achieving typical developmental milestones. If you're working in a school situation, you might see the child is asleep during school. You might also observe that that child is acting like a parent, so that parentification of a youth where they're taking on the adult responsibilities towards their own siblings. And they might just straight up tell you that there's nobody at home to take care of them. So those are all indications that neglect might be occurring. So I know that was short, but I also know that it was a lot. So again, just wanted to make sure we checked in with you to make sure that and we know that this material isn't easy to hear, but we want to make sure that it's okay not to be okay right now, that this information can be challenging and that's okay. But we want to make sure that you don't leave this lunch and learn without knowing where to turn if you need help or you want to share information with others about where they can get help. So on the slide now, you'll see that there's a couple resources listed, 211 First Call for Help, a national sexual assault hotline, and the Journey Center for Safety and Healing locally that can be accessed by calling 216-391-HELP. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to Natalie. And again, if you have any questions about the educational content I shared, please go ahead and type that in the Q&A and I'll try to answer that during this next part. Natalie?
Thanks, Ashley. So, you heard a lot of difficult to hear things and, our admiration to Ashley and her team who work so directly in all of this every day. But understanding why we need places like Providence House and really as a community, and as I mentioned in our mission statement, the people who follow Providence House believe strongly that it is our responsibility to protect children in our community and to assist families that are confronting challenges that may very unintentionally result in abuse or neglect. And that can be difficult to hear and understand. And so it's important that we understand that families really fear our public systems many times. They need a safe place for their children. They know they need help. They know their children are at risk, and they don't often know where to turn to get that support with confidence that their children won't be taken. So we guarantee, parents retain custody throughout their child's stay. Certainly the child's care long-term is our number one priority. We are first and foremost their advocate. So while our goal is to preserve families, and 97 to 99% of our families were very successful, there are cases where we just simply cannot, in good conscience and with a good heart, know these children are going to be safe. And we do work with the county. So, occasionally, each year there are a couple of children that we just know aren't going to be able to, I think we went back a slide, there we go, that we aren't going to be able to support through being reunited. But we're a community point of entry. We're seen as separate from public systems. We're not big institutional buildings on main corridor. It feels like a home. It feels like a safe place. And that's really important. It's also just as important that the parent and child have a lot of interaction together. And I'll cover some statistics in a bit about the distance when a child is in foster care, how infrequently they have contact with their parent, which affects parent-child bonding. Very frankly, not only the child with the parent, but the parent to the child, which increases risk of abuse and neglect as well. We allow parents to continue to be the expert. We check in with them, not only sharing the news and progress of their children, but asking their advice on specific care practices or certain things that their child responds well to in the home that we can use within our work at the crisis nursery. Most importantly, our goal is to get in before abuse and neglect occurs. Foster care is a solution, but it is a reactive solution that steps in after maltreatment occurs. So abuse and neglect have already occurred and been proven, substantiated. So we've already now got a child who has been victimized. The goal of our work at Providence House is to get to that family when the risk is present, but before it occurs. And so it's not only is it a greater cost for the child and ultimately the parent to have maltreatment occur, once those children go into foster care, it's extremely expensive for all of us. And annually, the children were able to reunite with their families, represent over $10 million saved in foster care costs every single year by working families through these crises, helping support them and reuniting them safely with children. So what I'd like to do quickly for those of you who may not be, and it's important to know these services link together. So while we've got a child track and a parent track or a family track, all of these things work and build on each other so that we can create that safety short and long term. So most of you are familiar probably with our services for children. And we're really protecting children not only through emergency shelter, but the whole child, their physical, their medical, emotional, social emotional development, educational needs, whether that's preschool or they're in school, and we're supporting in-school performance for school-age children. We also do children's medical care and monitoring. Our pediatric partner is Metro Health. Every child at Providence House receives a well child exam, and our pediatric nursery also supports children who have ongoing medical conditions, sometimes chronic medical conditions that need to be managed and cared for. We also have a number of partnerships with public agencies. One is actually with the Department of Children and Family Services, and this is for children who have been taken into emergency custody, where the situation was so dire that either either police or other safety forces arrive, remove children, an investigation is completed very rapidly, and those children have nowhere to go while they try to find family or foster homes for them. And so we partner with the county to have those children stay at Providence House so that they're not waiting in the waiting room for a day or two while we're trying to do that work. They can come, get some jammies, get a warm meal, get tucked into bed, be with us while we're trying to help the county find the next safest place for those children. Our family services are really comprehensive, and this is the piece that makes Providence House so very unique in the national crisis nursery community. Most crisis nurseries are doing the children's shelter work, and family services are not requirements of a crisis nursery program. We decided 15 years ago that as a child's advocate, it was essential that we also supported the family. So we understood that children were returning home to families that had been provided the intervention and support they needed so that they were safe and sustainable long-term for their children. So Ashley and her team provide case management, which includes counseling and support, referrals to over 100 partner agencies in the community, parent support and education, skill building on parenting skills and life skills, family medical skills training for families who do have children with chronic medical conditions so that there isn't unintentional medical neglect even going on, maybe because the parent was unclear or uncertain about how to provide for their child's medical needs. We do family trauma services. I think it's important to note that a good percentage of our families and children are coming in with significant trauma history. And if trauma is a new term for you, it's really exposure to things that have made them feel unsafe, fearful, fearful of the future, fearful of the past. And so we screen our families, and many of our parents are adult survivors themselves. And so it's important that we understand the experiences they've had before coming to Providence House so we can help prevent any triggers or re-victimization or a sense of reliving that trauma again while we're working with them. And then we have a 12-month aftercare program. So we really want our families to maintain their success. So just because children reunited and went home doesn't mean that everything's perfect and they don't have more that they want to focus on, additional goals to achieve. So in that 12-month program, we continue to support them, connect them to resources, provide basic need resources if they need them, so that they can continue being successful on the path that they've begun. We also do peer-to-peer group programming in here, so it allows them to build a social network of other families who have overcome challenges and can normalize and celebrate their success together. We do community-based services at Providence House. I think a lot of people think that everything happens right on our campus, and for a long time that was true. And if there's a silver lining in COVID, it really sped up our process in community services. So we were doing these things before, but they've clearly expanded with the need to do more community-based work during the pandemic. So we take community referrals from partner organizations to provide basic need items, particularly baby and children items that aren't available at pantries or food sites around town. Diapers, formula, wipes, things like that. During the pandemic, as an example, over 25 community partners referred over 300 families to us for these products. So we're sort of the baby site in town for basic needs. We also do a community education and resiliency program. This is basically taking all those family center services above, for the most part, and delivering them in local partner organizations that tend to be more youth-based and don't have parent or family support programming. We currently offer this at Boys and Girls Club sites. We have a grandparent cohort at Fairhill Partners. We're in some CMHA locations and Harvey Rice Elementary School with cohorts of parents and grandparents that are in an 8-week program, getting one-on-one and group work together. Again, even more preventative, getting to those families before they even need the nursery for their children is the goal. And then lastly, I'll cover kind of our community element. And really here it's about the collaborative partnership we have with over 100, I think last year was 130 referrals made or received from public and private human service agencies, hospitals, mental health programs, drug treatment programs, housing programs. So there's a huge system network that we interface with to support our families. We also do a lot of outreach, over 150 community outreach events to educate people on child abuse prevention and also about Providence House and the way that we engage in this work. We've begun to do quite a bit of advocacy to inform public policy and educate public officials in our community about not only child abuse prevention, but also the issues of poverty, system issues that perpetuate poverty or don't protect families in the way that maybe they intended them to. So we really use our family's lived experience and how policy is working on the street in real time to help educate and inform our policymakers so that policy decisions are appropriate and assisting families, not creating barriers for families. So when we look at sort of the results of the model, if we had to lift up, what some of the most important results are, really family permanency and stability that keep kids safe, keep families together. 99% of our families reunified. Last year, 96% of our families said that their family stability significantly increased by having worked with Providence House and the partners we've connected them to. We've already talked about over 10 million saved in Cuyahoga County annually, and this is on the low end. The cost per child goes up if they have medical conditions, behavioral health issues. So this is probably closer to 20 million or more when you think about some of the complex situations that we're handling with children we care for. We also talked about that family attachment. The longer a family and child are away from one another, the deeper the divide in their sense of attachment to one another as parent-child. Our average length of stay is less than 25 days versus state foster care, which is 240, and our local county foster care, which is even longer than that. Complicating that now is the lack of foster homes, and many children aren't even able to be placed in the community where their parent lives. We have children going counties away, some children going to other states. So the fact that we can maintain that family connection is so essential. A really important issue for us, and as a community, we've seen this over the last year, is really about equity and understanding our families that are minority families, families of color, and their outcomes in most of our public system and social service systems is not very good. They're overrepresented in the client population, and they're underrepresented in the success population, if you will. We actually looked at that in a research study with Case Western Reserve University and found the complete reverse was true at Providence House. Our families of color are the most engaged in our programming and the least likely to have their children enter foster care. It really speaks to the individualized intensity, the work we do to meet families where they're at, and the cultural competency that our team has. And this really addresses what was a state and now a national mandate to reduce the use of foster care, to really work on helping families through crisis and preserving them so that children are not removed from their parents. The trauma to a child and the parent is significant. So we found that 82% of the children that we served remained out of foster care even 3 to 5 years after going through the Providence House program, which really speaks to the enduring impact of the work we're having with our families. And I think it's going to go, so again, this digs in a little bit more to the family result. 99% reunited, 94 fully engaged in the program services, which is an astronomically high number when you look at typical family engagement in programs like ours. Most organizations are at like 40 to 50%. 96% of parents reporting that their bond not only stayed the same or improved. 61% said, my bond with my child improved through the work of Providence House. 71% stability and 99% agreed or strongly agreed that they had an overall very positive experience at Providence House. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ashley, and she'll cover a little bit more about the next steps if you are aware of suspected child maltreatment. Ashley?
Thank you. So we wanted to make sure that you guys, again, are reminded to use the Q&A. If you have any questions about what we've covered so far, please go ahead and use that. We wanted to make sure that with this presentation, you not only know more about abuse and neglect and how to recognize the signs, but you also understand that abuse and neglect don't always happen in really clear, simple, and specific terms. There's a lot of gray. So we also need to approach our understanding of child abuse and neglect from a lens of empathy. So I want to take some time to talk about some of those other issues that may compound the work of child abuse and neglect intervention. So we all have that responsibility and power to prevent maltreatment, but we need to continue to understand kind of the context of abuse and neglect. So the first thing we'd like to talk about is understanding child development. Like I said before, when I was talking about neglect, that if you aren't hitting typical milestones or you look malnourished or underfed, those could be signs of neglect. But if you don't understand the basics of child development and when milestones occur, you might misread a child's development delay and think that maybe that's tied to abuse or neglect, but really it might be because they have a certain medical diagnosis, or you were just unaware that it's okay for a child not to walk at 1 year old. If they're just crawling, that's okay. That doesn't mean that they haven't been given opportunity to move and develop gross motor skills. However, if you have a 1 year old who has a flat back of their head and they're not even getting into crawling position, that looks very different. So it's really important just to understand the typical trajectory of child development while understanding that it's still very fluid and it's not exactly as linear as we would hope. If it was, it'd be a lot easier to pinpoint some concerns around neglect, but just want to make sure we highlighted the importance of understanding child development, and also wanted to note for you that children are at the greatest risk of experiencing abuse or neglect when they have special needs or developmental delays, if there's been a premature birth, anything that really could cause additional stress on that family. And additionally, if you think about child abuse and neglect, someone asked in the Q&A, how do you even know if a child is at risk? And one of the things that's the most worrisome for us as providers is you don't always know unless somebody tells you that there's something until you're able to see some of those physical signs or social indicators. So children who don't have the verbal capacity or verbal skills to tell you that they have experienced something at home, means that they're at a higher risk for that abuse to occur without anybody knowing. The second thing is really committing to what we call protective factors. So protective factors are things that really act as buffers so that any kind of potentially traumatic or challenging experience doesn't take as heavy a toll on that family system. The most important thing that we really value are social supports and a strong attachment between the child and the caregiver. So the tighter that relationship is between the primary caregiver and the child, the more likely they are to be protected from abuse or neglect. And also for that caregiver, you parent the best when you have good social supports in place. So that's why we really encourage visitation. We provide programming for parents to meet each other and engage in peer relationships, because it takes a village, right? So you need to have those people around you to support you in your own parenting endeavors. Also having realistic expectations for a child. So that kind of goes along with child development, but to also keep in mind that families have their own expectations around achievement and success. And if you have expectations that are too high or not matched with your child's individual skills and preferences and abilities, there's a chance there that with that mismatch of expectation and performance, that there could be a heightened risk of abuse or neglect. And also making sure that you have adequate ability to solve problems. So if you all know anything about being under stress and trying to make a decision, it's that we don't always do our best when we're under a ton of pressure. That part of our brain that does the critical thinking just is not engaged under high elements of stress. So we go back to really reptilian brain function of just fight, flight, and freeze. So it's really important that folks be encouraged to practice making hard decisions, keeping kids safe, problem solving in advance, so that when we hit hard times, we're able to access resources and support to help us through, because like I said, we might not actually be able to make some of those decisions ourselves based on how stressed we might feel. The next is really just understanding environmental and social factors that could increase the likelihood of abuse or neglect. When I talked about dependency earlier, the inability to provide for a child, not necessarily having the willingness or interest and care for your child, but just being limited by things like poverty, being underemployed or unemployed and not having the resources, or having to make hard decisions about who watches your child while you go to work because you need to get that paycheck to pay for your rent to keep your housing, for example. Understanding that some families who experience abuse and neglect could be really isolated. And if you don't have access to resources or transportation to get to social service providers, any of those complicating factors that are going on will remain unaddressed, which could really increase the likelihood of something happening. Also knowing that the increase of violence in a home, like intimate partner violence, for example, can really increase the likelihood that a child could be harmed. So we always want to make sure that we look at that as well, and the patterns around domestic violence overlapping with child abuse. And then, like I said before, just making sure that families are able to access resources and that they know who exists. So we might have a lot of really great, rich social service providers in your community, but if a family doesn't know how to access them, what phone number to call, what door to turn to, it might be a real challenge to get the services in place to provide the supports and resources needed. Another way we can really engage in this work of prevention is to support local agencies that do this kind of work. So Natalie's done a really good job of talking about all the ways Providence House intersects with abuse and neglect. And while crisis nurseries differ widely across the country and really the world, we have crisis nurseries in Canada as well that we've been talking to, the main goal is still to prevent abuse and neglect, even if our models look a little bit different. But there are tons of agencies that are doing work in this arena, in this space. So looking at agencies like the Ohio Children's Trust Fund, Prevent Child Abuse Ohio, the Ohio Children's Alliance, and then also this month for child abuse prevention, engaging in activities to promote this prevention work. So we're wearing blue today in support of that. You can also make social media posts. You can talk about what you learned today in this lunch and learn with those in your social circles to really spread the awareness about the fact that we all have a role to play in making sure that kids are safe. The other thing that we can do is, if we think child abuse and neglect are happening, is again, understand that the responsibility to protect children is all of ours. So in all of these cases where something's happening, the child is the victim, and we need to come together to support them. So there are reporting pathways for people if you suspect abuse or neglect. And there's two different groups here that we're going to talk about. The first is those who are professionals and are called mandated reporters. So mandated reporter is a legal term defined by the Ohio Revised Code. It includes professionals who interact with children. So this can be anybody from medical professionals, legal professionals, childcare workers, school employees, mental health workers. So those folks are professionally required to report abuse and neglect as part of our job. So social workers, we have to report abuse and neglect if we see it. And even if we suspect it under reasonable circumstances, it is our duty to do that. So everyone else, well, you're not required to do that based on your profession. I still do feel like there's that obligation to report because we need to keep kids safe. While it's not required by law or by your license or education, it's something that we can do as an endeavor to make sure that kids are safe. And so we all take the same route to make those reports. In our county, we do that by calling 216-696-KIDS, or for the state, you can call 855-OH-CHILD to make a report. What I want to say about making a hotline call, which is what we call it in the business, is really you do not have to have proof that something has happened. The imminent risk of abuse, neglect, or dependency is enough to call. And we have to trust that the agency responsible for doing those investigations can take it from there. So again, our job is to notify that we have a concern, and it's up to another entity. In our county, it's the Division of Children and Family Services to investigate that allegation that we think child abuse or neglect is occurring. So I hope that makes sense to everybody here. And when we look at this visual here today, this is about the calls made in Cuyahoga County alone in 2018. So many calls were made to the hotline to report abuse and neglect, and over almost 15,000 calls were substantiated, meaning that they did investigations and they figured out that something was happening there. And they have a bunch of responses that they can take in supporting those families. Making a call does not mean that a child necessarily is going into foster care. You'll see that 3,000 almost of these cases were transferred to ongoing services, meaning there was a case opened with a caseworker by the county to provide additional support and services to help keep that child in the home. So they have diversion responses, they have education and training, but each one of these numbers here is a child that was kept safe because somebody, a mandated reporter or a layperson, made that call to make sure that they did their part to prevent any harm happening to a child. So I just also want to say that we don't know who is most likely to be a perpetrator of domestic violence, of child abuse, of neglect. It can be anyone. So it's important when we're thinking about child abuse and neglect, we're not always just focusing on parents and caregivers, but we're looking at anybody who has interaction with those children. So parents, teachers, daycare providers, babysitters. So that's why everybody is encouraged to make those calls should they see anything that's concerning. Natalie?
Thank you, Ashley. I know we're giving you a lot of information. If you have questions, Ashley and our contact information will come up at the end of the screen. You can also find us on the website. Sometimes it could take a little bit of time to process all of this, and we're happy to continue to be an ongoing support for you. As Ashley talked about, how to prevent it, how to make the calls. We've talked about what Providence House does to do this work. There are real significant situations and impacts around lack of prevention. And I think, while we're all so proud of our city and being a part of the greater Cleveland community, we really are not ranked well in how we are supporting and protecting our own children. We are number one again in child poverty. 52% of children living in Cleveland live in poverty. We know that kids growing up in poverty have lower IQs. Their chance of growing up out of poverty is less than 50%. So it has a significant factor. We're number two also in infant mortality. And it's hard to believe with all of our world-class medical systems, but a lot of our families don't have access to appropriate prenatal support post-pregnancy. And there's still a huge disparity between babies of color that are dying at 6 times the rate of white infants. We are 45th nationally for our investment in state child welfare and abuse prevention programs. We were ranked 45th in the United States. Again, the need for advocacy and the reason we do advocacy is around these kinds of results. We need to be doing better. Ohio needs to be doing more to invest. Childhood and abuse and neglect isn't just the impact at the moment it occurs for the child. This is a lifelong situation that, you know, their bodies will remember, their systems, their health, everything will be affected. 1 in 8 children in the United States will have a confirmed case of malnutrition. And the average cost for all of us for all of the interventions that child's going to require throughout their life is over $200,000 per year. So we're talking about $80 billion nationally every year being invested to address the outcomes of child maltreatment. We know that these kiddos, unfortunately, through a lot of research, almost to the birthday, are going to experience really adverse situations. High school dropout rates, violent and juvenile adult prisoners, teen parents diagnosed with psychological and medical conditions, very young. 80% of 21-year-olds were abused as children that have psychological or mental health disorders. We also see obesity. We see that play out as in diabetes, and these children are more likely, 80% are more likely to die 20 years sooner due to chronic health conditions than a nurtured peer. So these are really startling facts when you think about the earlier we do this intervention, all of this can be done. Ultimately, our societal outcomes for the children. So how can you continue to help? Ashley mentioned a few ways. Number one, show your empathy and help a parent who is struggling. Reach out. If you've got a neighbor who's a single mom who, you know, she doesn't have a babysitter, she's got to make the choice between losing her job or leaving her kids alone, offer to help. And if you really see a family that needs more support than that, refer them to Providence House. If they don't want the help, you're concerned about the child, as Ashley said, make a call to 696 Kids if you're suspecting that that child is unsafe, and let the investigation move forward to determine that child's safety and get the family the support they need. You can become a donor or volunteer for Providence House. We've got lots of information on our website. We always need help around the campus. We always need items for the children. So there are lots of ways you can help us there. And then, as Ashley mentioned, also engage in those let people know, hey, did you know this is Child Abuse Prevention Month? I think it's interesting to me that, you know, 40 years ago, we started Providence House and we're celebrating our anniversary and educating the community about child abuse prevention in the same month. We have a whole bunch of events going on at Providence House. So if you go to our website on the events page, we've got another chat with Nat next week. We've got drive-through birthday parties. We've got a documentary film screening on our 40-year history. We have a virtual tour at the end of the month of our new Eastside facility. So we hope you'll continue to join us. Again, given the circumstances around the pandemic, most of these are virtual. You can dial in and have live conversations, live tours, things like that. And then Ashley mentioned Prevent Child Abuse Ohio. Prevent child abuse activities in April, how you can launch prevention activities with toolkits in your own community to educate your friends, neighbors, schools, churches about child abuse prevention. So we hope that you'll take advantage of those opportunities. And I think that's it. We will double check for questions in the Q&A if anyone has questions. Again, you have the contact information for both Ashley and I. Continue to feel free to contact us if you've got additional questions about what you heard today. We will be recording this lunch and learn, so it will be available for you to view online after we get the recording all staged and ready to go. So I don't see any other questions coming through. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Know that we are here for our community's children only through your support and your engagement with us. So I'll turn it over to Ashley for a farewell, and I do see a Q&A. So Ashley, if you want to do that, I can see what we've got in the Q&A.
Sure. Thank you again, everybody, for your time. I know how valuable all of your time is. We're thankful that you took this time to learn about the activities that you can do to help support families in crisis, support Providence House, and just recognize child abuse and neglect a little bit better after this today. Again, please reach out to me directly if you have any questions. I'd be happy to talk with you one-on-one or help walk you through a situation, lead you to resources, anything you might need. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And we just had a comment that this was a great introduction, good introduction to child abuse and how our mission aligns. We are planning to do lunch and learns quarterly for this year. So stay tuned for our next lunch and learn topic, and we'll continue to move that out to the community, but it'll be a conversation like this with supporters, friends, and people who just want to learn more about the topics that we'll be bringing to you. So again, thank you. Happy spring for some more of these events and activities throughout the month of April.